With the release of 28 years later, The Bone Temple, I thought about reviewing this masterpiece of a film, but I decided to look at the franchise and talk about why I think 28 Weeks Later is one of the strangest sequels ever made. What makes 28 Weeks Later such a strange sequel is basically a number of aspects. Looking at it, it's a direct continuation with no returning characters, no returning creative leads, and a completely different identity. It opens like a Danny Boyle film and then immediately becomes a high-octane military zombie movie. It doesn't meaningfully expand the story, it's been quietly overwritten by later canon, and yet it's still really good. So how did a sequel that doesn't quite belong to its own franchise end up working at all? Most sequels tell you exactly what they are within the first 5 minutes. 28 Weeks Later doesn't. Released 5 years after the smash hit 28 Days Later, it is a direct sequel, not a reboot, not a remake, and not a reimagining. Whilst 28 Years Later can be seen somewhat as a quasi-sequel reboot, 28 Weeks Later is a firm sequel. And yet not a single major creative voice from the original returns. No Danny Boyle, although he did direct the opening scene and served as an executive producer, no Alex Garland, and most importantly, no returning cast. Normally when that happens, a sequel shrinks, it gets cheaper, it gets safer, and basically quietly disappears. But 28 Weeks Later does the opposite. It has a bigger budget, a larger cast, more elaborate set pieces, and a much more polished production. And that contradiction defines everything about this movie. The existence of 28 Weeks Later is unusual before you even press play. If we look at similarly made sequels that have no returning creative forces, look at American Psycho 2, Donnie Darko, S. Darko, or The Butterfly Effect 2, these films keep the name and lose the identity, and quietly reduce the scale. They're cheaper, they're safer, and they exist because the brand exists, and they are a quick way to make fast money. From the look of it, 28 Weeks Later should have just followed that exact pattern. Instead it does the opposite. It gets a larger budget, a wider release, and a more ambitious scope. But 28 Weeks Later is strange because despite being a direct sequel, it doesn't really expand the franchise. It doesn't deepen the mythology, it doesn't evolve the affected, and it doesn't meaningfully push the timeline forward. Even its ending, the infection spreading beyond Britain, is never followed up. And with 28 Years Later, much of 28 Weeks Later has effectively been sidestepped. It doesn't fail as a sequel, it just doesn't build on the previous film. And that makes it a bit of an anomaly, because 28 Weeks Later isn't trying to recreate what made the original special. It's trying to respond to it. Where 28 Days Later asks what happens when society collapses overnight, 28 Weeks Later asks what happens when we rebuild before we're ready. Where 28 Days Later was about isolation, 28 Weeks Later is more about systems, checkpoints, protocols, rules designed to create safety, and one by one they fail. Not because the infected are unstoppable, but because humans are inconsistent. The central tragedy of the film isn't the outbreak, it's that the outbreak was avoidable. Don isn't just a coward or a villain, he's the embodiment of the film's worldview. Someone who survives by abandoning responsibility, then destroys everything trying to reclaim it. And the movie never even redeems him. It simply shows the cost. And this is where I need to be clear about something. 28 Weeks Later is not as good as 28 Days Later. It doesn't have the same emotional depth, it doesn't linger on quiet moments, and simply it just doesn't give the characters the space to breathe in the way the original does. 28 Days Later is a film which focuses on loneliness, grief and human connection. 28 Weeks Later just isn't interested in that. And that's okay, because what it loses in intimacy, it gains in momentum. As a straight up zombie horror action film, 28 Weeks Later is brutal and incredibly well made. It moves, it escalates, and it simply understands how to stage chaos on a large scale. And a huge part of why it works is the cast. Watching the film now, what really stands out is how stacked that cast actually is, especially in hindsight. You've got a very young Idris Elba, although why he's playing an American I'm not sure. Jeremy Renner shows up for what is essentially a very early career performance, and of course Rosie Byrne, who is now an Oscar nominee. None of these characters are deeply explored, but they don't need to be. Their job isn't to carry theme, it's to carry momentum, and they do that incredibly well. That's ultimately why I like 28 Weeks Later. It knows what it's not. It's not trying to outdo the original emotionally, it's not even trying to replicate the sense of discovery or quiet dread. Instead, it commits to being a fast, vicious, deeply pessimistic zombie film, which focuses on when things go wrong, they don't unravel slowly, they explode. And even when the film stretches logic or simplifies character decisions, it never feels lazy. It's a very focused film, and it's a film that understands that sometimes spectacle isn't a downgrade. And of course 28 Weeks Later isn't as good as 28 Days Later. And actually, to be honest, 28 Weeks Later is probably the weakest film in the entire franchise. But it's definitely something very different from 28 Days. This is just basically a straight up zombie action film. But nonetheless, it's a sequel that just fascinates me, existing in a space where it is part of a franchise but is largely ignored. It's still a really great film, but it's just a sequel that doesn't quite belong. It's simply a cold, relentless, high budget zombie horror film, and it absolutely delivers.